That fifth cement truck just shattered the main support beam on my great-grandfather's century-old bridge. And there was Deborah Kensington Price, our HOA president, standing at her kitchen window with a coffee mug, actually smiling. She thought she had me beat. Send truck after truck across my family's hand-built oak bridge until it collapsed, then swoop in with her emergency demolition order. Force me to sell the creekfront land my family had protected for 4 generations. What this corporate lawyer turned suburban tyrant didn't know? I'm a retired Army Corps engineer, and I was about to turn her own corruption into the trap that would destroy her forever. The diesel exhaust was choking out my morning air. My grandmother's china was rattling in the cabinet like an earthquake. But watching those stress fractures spread through timber my great-grandfather had cut with his own hands, I wasn't shaking from rage anymore. I was calculating. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal generational family land? And where are you watching from? Let me know if HOAs are this corrupt in your area too. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. My name is Marcus Thornfield, and 3 months ago I was just a 52-year-old retired engineering contractor living peacefully on the 40-acre homestead my great-grandfather built in the 1920s. The property sits along Willow Creek in what used to be rural countryside, until the Willowbrook subdivision sprouted up around us like weeds in a perfectly manicured lawn. The crown jewel of our land has always been the bridge, hand-hewn from local oak by my great-grandfather's own hands. It spans Willow Creek and connects our property to the main road. 4 generations of Thornfields have crossed that bridge to come home. My grandfather proposed to my grandmother on that bridge. My father taught me to fish from its railings. I carried my wife across it on our wedding day, and later carried my newborn daughter the same way. The wood still smells like the linseed oil my great-grandfather used to preserve it. When you run your fingers along the handrail, you can feel every tool mark from his handplane. On quiet mornings before the invasion, you could hear the creek babbling underneath and catch the sweet scent of honeysuckle growing wild along the banks. Then Deborah Kensington Price slithered into the neighborhood. At 48, she's what happens when corporate law meets suburban dictatorship. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair that defies physics, designer suits for grocery runs, and that leather portfolio she carries like it contains the nuclear codes. She made her fortune helping developers bulldoze family farms for strip malls. Now she'd set her sights on our quiet street. 6 months after moving in, she'd maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency. Her first decree: my century-old bridge was a substandard infrastructure hazard threatening property values, because apparently authentic craftsmanship is bad for business when you're planning luxury developments. I'll never forget our first face-off. She appeared at my door in a crisp white blazer, legal papers in hand, wearing a smile that could freeze hellfire. "Mr. Thornfield, I'm here to help modernize your property." "My property was standing when this was still cow pasture," I shot back. "Progress waits for no one, not even your precious antique." Her voice turned arctic. "Replace it with our approved concrete structure or face $500 in daily fines." See, here's what I didn't tell her. 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers teaches you that every structure has weak points. Every enemy has vulnerabilities, and every problem has a solution if you gather enough data. When I refused her ultimatum, the cement truck parade began. Suddenly, every construction project in the subdivision needed to route their massive trucks directly over my bridge. "Sorry, pal," drivers would shrug. "HOA-approved route." These weren't delivery trucks. They were monsters. 30-ton cement mixers that made my century-old oak beams scream in protest. Each passage left new stress fractures spreading like spiderwebs through the timber. The peaceful morning mist rising from Willow Creek was now contaminated with diesel exhaust that burned your throat and coated everything in concrete dust. 3 weeks into this assault, Deborah's brother-in-law, who just happened to be the city building inspector, arrived for an emergency safety evaluation. What are the odds he'd find the bridge critically unsafe right after his sister-in-law's demolition campaign? "Sorry, Mr. Thornfield," he said with all the sincerity of a used car salesman. "Immediate danger to public safety. 30 days to demolish, or we'll do it and send you the bill." That night, I sat on my bridge listening to my grandfather clock chime midnight in the house behind me. The honeysuckle still smelled sweet, but diesel fumes lingered underneath like a threat. As I traced the weathered handrail my great-grandfather had shaped with his own hands, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't about a bridge anymore. This was war. And Deborah had just made her first tactical mistake. She'd given me a timeline. In the Army, we had a saying: time is the ammunition of planning. Time to load up. 2 weeks into Deborah's cement truck campaign, my daughter Sarah announced her engagement. She wanted to hold the reception in our backyard, the same spot where her grandparents had celebrated their golden anniversary. The date was set for the first Saturday in June, with 60 guests expected and a catered dinner overlooking Willow Creek. I should have known Deborah wouldn't let a family celebration go uninterrupted. The morning of the wedding dawned perfect. Clear skies, gentle breeze carrying the scent of my wife's prize-winning roses. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's pearl-white lace dress as guests began arriving around 4 o'clock. The photographer was capturing those precious family moments when I heard the first diesel engine rumbling in the distance like distant thunder. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is," I muttered, checking my watch. But there it was, a massive cement mixer thundering down our quiet road, heading straight for the bridge. Then another, and another. 6 trucks in total, each one timing their arrival to maximize chaos during the ceremony. It was like watching a military convoy invade a church picnic. "Dad, what's happening?" Sarah grabbed my arm as the first truck's weight made the entire bridge shudder. The sound was like a freight train passing 6 feet away. Elderly Aunt Martha's champagne flute hit the ground in a shower of crystal. Uncle Robert's war medals rattled against his chest like wind chimes in a hurricane. The bridge swayed so violently that Great Aunt Helen, all 93 pounds of her, had to grab the railing to keep from tumbling into the creek. My mother, 86 years old and moving carefully with her walker, froze in terror halfway across, her knuckles white against the weathered oak. "Everyone back to the house!" I shouted over the diesel roar. "Now!" The photographer got it all on video, the fear in my mother's eyes, wedding guests fleeing like the bridge might collapse, Sarah's perfect day dissolving into chaos and exhaust fumes. As the last truck rumbled away, I noticed Deborah's silhouette in her kitchen window, coffee mug raised in what looked suspiciously like a toast. That's when I made my first breakthrough. While helping shaken guests to their cars, I overheard 2 truck drivers talking by the road. "Man, 6 runs in one day? That's serious overtime pay. Hell yeah." Kensington Construction pays double for weekend emergency deliveries. Kensington Construction. The pieces click together like a well-oiled machine. Back in my Army days, we'd learned that following the money trail usually led straight to the enemy's weak spot. A quick online search that night revealed the truth. Deborah owned 40% of the construction company supplying all that cement. Her emergency bridge replacement quote arrived Monday morning via certified mail. $80,000 for a basic concrete span that would meet current safety standards and HOA architectural guidelines. Meanwhile, I'd contacted the State Historical Society for an insurance appraisal. Their assessment? $150,000 in historical value, with the structure rated excellent condition considering its age and minimal maintenance requirements. So she damages my bridge with her own trucks, then profits from the replacement contract. It was like watching someone slash your tires, then offer to sell you new ones at triple the price. But here's something I remembered from my engineering days. Documentation beats accusation every time. I started building my case like planning a bridge construction, methodically, systematically, with backup calculations for every assumption. First, I filed an emergency restraining order against further truck traffic. My lawyer, Jim Patterson, whose grandmother had taught mine how to can peaches, presented timeline photos showing the bridge was perfectly stable before Deborah's truck parade began. The stress fractures followed a clear pattern that any structural engineer could read like a blueprint of deliberate sabotage. The temporary restraining order was granted Wednesday. No more trucks allowed across my bridge pending a full structural evaluation by an independent engineer. Thursday, I hired Dr. Amanda Rodriguez from State University's Civil Engineering Department. She arrived Friday with enough sensors and cameras to monitor a space launch, plus 40 years of bridge analysis experience. Her preliminary report was pure vindication. This structure shows classic signs of recent overload stress, but the original construction is remarkably sound. Someone built this bridge to last centuries, not decades. By Saturday, I was actually optimistic. The truck harassment had stopped. I had professional documentation. The legal system was working exactly as designed. Then Sunday evening, my neighbor Jake Morrison knocked on my door with a printout that made my blood pressure spike. "Marcus, you need to see what she's posting online." The Facebook post was vintage Deborah, corporate speak hiding a character assassination. "Concerned neighbors, we must address the dangerous situation at 1847 Creek Road. Mr. Thornfield's antiquated bridge has been deemed structurally unsound by qualified inspectors. His selfish refusal to modernize this hazardous crossing puts our entire community at risk. How many children have to get hurt before he accepts responsibility? 37 comments and 49 shares within 6 hours. Half the neighborhood now convinced I was some kind of public menace. Round 1 to Deborah. But the fight was just getting started. Monday morning brought bad news wrapped in official letterhead. Deborah had somehow gotten my restraining order overturned by a different judge, Judge Bradley Hoffman, who apparently spent more time on the golf course with our HOA president than in his courtroom. The new order was brief and brutal. Plaintiff has failed to demonstrate irreparable harm. Defendant HOA retains authority over approved traffic routes through subdivision common areas. Common areas? My bridge wasn't a common area. It was private property that had been standing since before their precious subdivision was even a developer's wet dream. But try explaining property law to a judge who's already made up his mind over cocktails and campaign contributions. By Tuesday afternoon, the cement trucks were back with a vengeance. Not just occasional deliveries anymore. Deborah had scheduled them every 30 minutes from dawn to dusk, like some kind of industrial metronome. The constant rumbling made my coffee cups perform a nervous dance on the kitchen counter. My wife Linda started wearing noise-canceling headphones just to read her morning paper without developing a migraine. The psychological warfare was working. Neighbors who used to wave now crossed the street to avoid conversation. Someone had been spreading whispers that I was anti-development and selfishly hurting everyone's property values. Anonymous complaints to the county started piling up. Unlicensed bridge operation, public safety hazard, noise violations from confronting truck drivers. Wednesday brought the biggest monster yet, a massive concrete pumper that made the bridge sag a full 6 inches under its weight. The ancient oak groaned like it was crying. I stood there filming the whole nightmare when the driver leaned out his window. "Sorry about this, Pops. Just following orders from the office." "Whose office?" I shouted over the diesel roar. "Lady pays the bills, lady calls the shots, that's all I know." That night, I couldn't sleep. The bridge was showing serious battle damage. 3 support beams now had visible stress fractures spreading like lightning through the wood. The handrail my great-grandfather had carved by hand was developing splits along the grain. Every truck passage was literally destroying a century of family craftsmanship, one calculated assault at a time. But insomnia sometimes breeds inspiration. Around 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling and listening to distant highway traffic, I remembered something from my Army Corps days. When facing superior firepower, you don't charge the enemy's strength, you find their weak point and exploit it. Back in Bosnia, we'd learned that the newest fortifications often had the oldest vulnerabilities. Deborah was operating under a dangerous assumption that newer meant legally stronger. Thursday morning, I drove to the county courthouse and requested the original survey documents for our property. The clerk, Mrs. Henderson, had known my grandfather from his farming days and was delighted to help dig through the dusty archives. "These old records tell such stories," she said, pulling out a leather-bound ledger that smelled like decades of bureaucracy and hope. "Your great-grandfather was quite the forward-thinking man." The original 1923 survey was written in formal legal language that took me an hour to decode, but the implications hit me like a freight train. When great-grandfather Thornfield built his bridge, he'd included specific language about perpetual right of passage for family and invited guests across Willow Creek via existing timber span structure. More importantly, the bridge predated the HOA's easement agreement by 60 years. From my military housing disputes in Germany, I remembered a crucial principle. Prior existing structures have what's called grandfather rights that can't be overruled by later zoning changes or HOA covenants. It's like constitutional law for property. First rights trump everything that comes after. The rest of Thursday disappeared in the county law library, where I discovered that the HOA's authority to regulate common areas had about as much legal standing over my bridge as a snowball's chance in hell. Their entire case was built on sand. Friday, I contacted Elizabeth Morrison, a local historian who specialized in documenting century-old structures. She arrived Saturday morning with professional equipment and genuine excitement about our bridge's construction techniques. "This joinery work is absolutely remarkable," she said, running experienced hands along the mortise and tenon joints, museum-quality craftsmanship. "And these chisel marks? Your great-grandfather was a true artisan." Her preliminary assessment confirmed my hopes. The bridge qualified for historic designation under state preservation laws. Once that paperwork was filed, any demolition would require environmental impact studies, public hearings, and enough red tape to strangle an elephant. Sunday afternoon, I made my strategic counterstrike. I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board, not Deborah, but the 4 other members who'd been steamrolled by her aggressive leadership. We gathered at Jake Morrison's house, where his wife's apple pie created a much more civilized atmosphere than our usual war zones. Folks, I began, spreading out copies of the 1923 survey like battle plans. We need to discuss property law and historical preservation. Because what Deborah's been telling you about HOA authority, it's not just wrong, it could land this board in serious legal trouble. Board member Patricia Walsh's face went pale when she saw the survey dates. Marcus, are you saying we've been operating outside our legal authority? I'm saying you've been played, and it's time to level the playing field. By Monday morning, 3 HOA board members had quietly distanced themselves from Deborah's bridge crusade. But instead of cutting her losses, she doubled down like a Vegas gambler with a maxed-out credit card and delusions of grandeur. The emergency HOA meeting she called for Tuesday evening was standing room only. Deborah had spent the weekend working her network, filling the community center with supporters who'd bought into her public safety crisis narrative. She'd even printed professional-looking flyers with dramatic photos of structurally compromised bridges, none of which resembled mine, but fear doesn't require accuracy when you're dealing with nervous homeowners. Ladies and gentlemen, Deborah announced from behind the podium, like she was addressing a joint session of Congress. We face a situation that threatens the safety and property values of our entire community. Mr. Thornfield's obstinate refusal to modernize his dangerous crossing has forced us to take decisive legal action. Her PowerPoint presentation was a masterpiece of corporate manipulation. She declared my property a commercial operation because delivery trucks and service vehicles occasionally cross the bridge to reach my house. Retroactive HOA fees totaling $50,000 in unpaid commercial assessments dating back 5 years. Late penalties and interest brought the grand total to nearly $75,000. Furthermore, she continued, her voice dripping with manufactured regret, the HOA lien process legally empowers us to force sale of non-compliant properties to recover these legitimate community debts. The crowd murmured approval, like sheep following a Judas goat. I sat in the back row feeling like Daniel eyeing a very hungry lion, watching neighbors I'd known for decades nod along with her fabricated emergency. The smell of burnt coffee from the community center's ancient percolator mixed with the sweaty tension of mob mentality taking hold. When they opened public comment, I stood up slowly. I'd like to address the board. Mr. Thornfield, Deborah's smile could have performed surgery. Surely you understand this is a legal matter now. Perhaps you should speak through your attorney. Oh, I plan to. But first, I want to share something fascinating I discovered this week. I walked to the front and connected my laptop to their projector. The first image that appeared was the 1923 property survey, blown up large enough for everyone to read the faded ink. This is the original survey for my property, filed 60 years before this HOA existed. Notice the specific language about perpetual right of passage and existing timber span structure. Deborah's confident expression flickered like a candle in wind. Ancient paperwork doesn't override current safety regulations. You're absolutely right, I agreed pleasantly. But it does override HOA authority. See, my bridge predates your covenants by 6 decades. Property lawyers call these grandfather rights, existing structures that are legally protected from future regulatory changes. The room went quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and someone's nervous cough echoing off cinderblock walls. I clicked to the next slide, Elizabeth Morrison's Preliminary Historic Designation Report. The State Historical Society has confirmed this bridge qualifies for protection under preservation laws. Any demolition or major alteration now requires environmental impact studies, public hearings, and enough bureaucratic review to choke a horse. But my real nuclear option was the third slide. Architectural plans I'd discovered through a public records request. Detailed drawings for luxury condominiums specifically designed for creekfront lots, filed by Kensington Development Company 6 months before Deborah moved to our neighborhood. These are development plans for high-end condos, I announced calmly. Notice the lot numbers? They correspond exactly to my property, filed by a company that shares our HOA president's maiden name. Interesting coincidence. The silence was so complete you could hear people's worldviews cracking. Deborah's face had transformed from confident prosecutor to deer-in-headlights defendant in about 30 seconds. That's completely irrelevant to legitimate safety concerns, she stammered. Is it? Because I also found these... My final slide showed bank loan documents with pre-construction financing for the condo project, listing my property as collateral. Someone's been planning this hostile takeover for 2 years. The cement trucks, the bogus safety inspections, the manufactured crisis. It's all been theater leading to forced sale of my family's land. The crowd was turning like a tide. I could see it in their faces. The shift from angry mob to confused jury realizing they'd been played. Patricia Walsh raised her hand from the board table. Deborah, did you disclose these development plans when you joined the board? This is all a distraction from real safety issues. Did you disclose them? Patricia's voice could have cut steel. Before Deborah could construct another lie, Jake Morrison stood up from the audience. I move for an emergency vote of no confidence in our current HOA president. Seconded, called Mrs. Patterson from across the room. Within 10 minutes, Deborah Kensington Price was no longer in charge of anything except explaining to her lawyer why her carefully orchestrated property grab had just exploded like a meth lab in a thunderstorm. But as I packed up my laptop, I knew this was just intermission. Cornered animals don't surrender. They get desperate. Getting kicked out of the HOA presidency should have been the end of Deborah's bridge campaign. Instead, it turned her into something far more dangerous. A desperate woman with nothing left to lose and a law degree she was willing to use like a chainsaw in a china shop. 3 days after her public humiliation, I was in my workshop organizing the mountain of legal documents I'd accumulated when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson from the county courthouse, and she sounded like she'd just discovered buried treasure. Marcus, you need to get down here immediately. I found something in the old records that'll change everything. An hour later, I was standing in the courthouse basement surrounded by filing cabinets that looked like they'd survived both world wars and a flood. The musty smell of old paper and bureaucratic history filled the air as Mrs. Henderson pulled out a manila folder so ancient the edges crumbled like autumn leaves. I was cross-referencing your property records with the original township surveys, she said, spreading out a hand-drawn map from 1919 that felt fragile as tissue paper. Look at this carefully. The map showed Willow Creek's original course, meandering through what was now the entire Willowbrook subdivision. But more importantly, it showed something that made my engineer's brain start calculating possibilities. Detailed water rights boundaries marked in faded red ink. See these dotted lines? Misses. Henderson traced faded markings along the creek with a reverent finger. That's the original riparian boundary for your great-grandfather's property. Back in 1919, owning land along a waterway meant you controlled access rights to that water for the entire upstream flow. I stared at the map, pieces falling into place like a perfectly engineered structure finding its natural balance. You're saying my family owns water rights to the entire creek system? Not just access rights, usage rights, development rights, even environmental protection authority. Your great-grandfather was 10 times smarter than anyone realized. He didn't just buy land with a pretty creek running through it. He bought control of the water source that every single property in this subdivision depends on for their existence. The implications hit me like an avalanche. Every home in Willowbrook had been sold with promises of creek access and waterfront amenities. The HOA had been collecting monthly fees for creek maintenance and environmental management for 15 years. But according to this map, they'd been selling rights they didn't own and managing resources they had no legal authority to control. Mrs. Henderson, are you telling me the entire subdivision was built and sold using fraudulent water rights claims? She nodded grimly. Every deed, every property description, every HOA covenant that mentions creek access, it's all legally invalid. Your family never signed away those water rights, and under state law, they can't be taken by eminent domain because they're privately held riparian resources, not municipal utilities. That evening, I called my lawyer, Jim Patterson, for an emergency consultation. When I spread the 1919 map across his mahogany conference table, his reaction was worth a year's subscription to premium cable. Marcus, do you understand what you're holding? A really old piece of paper? Legal dynamite with a lit fuse. If this survey is accurate and properly recorded, you could shut off water access to every property in that subdivision tomorrow morning. Legally speaking, they're all trespassing on your water rights every time they water their lawns or wash their dishes. The nuclear option was right there in faded ink and century-old surveyor's precision. I could demand every property owner in Willowbrook renegotiate their water usage, pay retroactive fees, or face legal action for unauthorized riparian access. The potential damages could financially destroy the entire neighborhood, but that's not who my family raised me to be. I didn't want to devastate innocent neighbors. I wanted justice for the guilty parties and protection for my bridge. What I want, I told Jim, is accountability for the corruption and protection for my family's legacy. Can we use this as leverage without becoming the villain in someone else's story? Jim smiled like a chess master seeing inevitable checkmate. Marcus, you're not just holding legal leverage anymore. You own the entire game board. The next morning, I cleared my workshop like a general preparing for the campaign of his life. Maps, legal documents, and engineering reports covered every surface. The familiar smell of sawdust and machine oil mixed with the anticipation of finally taking control of this mess. My core team assembled by noon. Jim Patterson with his legal expertise, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez bringing her structural engineering credentials, Elizabeth Morrison armed with historical documentation, and Mrs. Henderson carrying copies of every relevant property record dating back to statehood. We looked like the world's most unlikely war council, but we had something Deborah never expected, the truth backed by a century of documentation. All right, folks, I began, spreading the 1919 water rights map across my workbench. We're not just saving a bridge anymore. We're exposing a fraud that's been bleeding this community dry for 15 years. Jim leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. The water rights discovery changes everything, but we need to be surgical about this. Go too hard, and we hurt innocent families. Go too soft, and Deborah escapes accountability. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her structural analysis report. From an engineering standpoint, the bridge is actually safer than most modern concrete spans. The truck damage was superficial, stress fractures that could be repaired in a weekend with proper materials. Someone who knew what they were doing could have identified that immediately. Which brings us to the cover-up, Elizabeth added. The building inspector who condemned the bridge? He's not just Deborah's brother-in-law. He also has a consulting contract with Kensington Development. I found the paperwork yesterday. Mrs. Henderson nodded grimly. And the judge who overturned your restraining order? His campaign contributions include a substantial donation from Kensington Construction last election cycle. The corruption web was bigger than I'd imagined, but that actually worked in our favor. In my Army days, we'd learned that the larger the conspiracy, the more vulnerable it becomes to exposure. Too many people keeping too many secrets eventually means someone talks. Here's our multi-pronged strategy, I announced, feeling like the tactician I'd been trained to be. Legal track. Jim files a quiet title action to clarify the water rights and demands a complete HOA audit showing where all those creek maintenance fees actually went. I moved to the next section of my improvised command center. Public relations track. Elizabeth coordinates with the State Historical Society for media attention about historic preservation. We time the revelation for maximum impact. Dr. Rodriguez spread out her engineering diagrams. Technical track. I'll provide professional testimony proving the bridge's structural integrity and showing how concrete replacement would actually be less safe given the soil conditions and flood patterns. And the trap? Jim asked, understanding where this was heading. We let Deborah think she still has cards to play. Document everything she does from here on out. Let her dig her own legal grave while we build an airtight case. I felt the satisfaction of a plan coming together. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let them hunt until they expose themselves completely. Over the next hour, we assigned specific roles. Mrs. Patterson, the retired journalist who lived 3 houses down, would handle media contacts. Jake Morrison, our city council member, would coordinate the official government response. Dr. Sarah River from the university's biology department would document the environmental impact of any development on the protected salamander habitat. Now, for the knowledge everyone in this room needs to understand, I said, pulling out a legal primer Jim had prepared. When you're dealing with property disputes, especially involving HOA overreach, document everything, research original deeds at the county courthouse, and never assume newer regulations automatically override older property rights. The law protects existing structures and prior claims, but only if you can prove them. Dr. Rodriguez added her engineering perspective. And remember, when someone claims a structure is unsafe, demand independent professional evaluation. Don't let intimidation tactics replace actual engineering analysis. Elizabeth contributed the historical angle. Most importantly, historic properties have protection pathways that bypass local politics entirely. State and federal preservation laws can override HOA authority when properly applied. The preparation phase took 3 weeks of careful coordination. I installed discrete trail cameras to monitor any further bridge sabotage attempts. Created duplicate document sets stored in fireproof safes both at home and in Jim's office. rehearsed testimony scenarios until I could present complex legal concepts in terms any jury could understand. We planned witness coordination for the upcoming town hall meeting where Deborah would make her final stand. The Historical Society agreed to bring professional photographers. The local newspaper committed to full coverage. Channel 7 News promised to send a crew if we could guarantee a newsworthy story. The beauty of this plan, Jim observed as we wrapped up our final strategy session, is that we're not destroying anyone except the people who deserve it. Innocent homeowners get protection from future fraud, the community gets honest leadership, and your bridge gets the legal protection it deserves. I looked around at my unlikely team of allies, feeling something I hadn't experienced since my military days, the confidence that comes from thorough preparation and righteous purpose. Deborah wanted a war, I said. Time to show her what happens when you pick a fight with people who actually know how to win one. Deborah's response to losing the HOA presidency was swift, vicious, and completely predictable. Within 48 hours of our strategy session, she'd filed 3 separate lawsuits, one claiming I'd slandered her at the public meeting, another alleging my bridge posed imminent danger to public welfare, and a third demanding emergency demolition under public safety authority. The woman had clearly lost her mind, but dangerous people often do their most damage in the final throes of desperation. Tuesday morning brought the first sign she'd escalated to outright sabotage. My trail cameras caught everything in crystal clear high definition. HOA board member Stephen Walsh, Patricia's husband, who'd apparently stayed loyal to Deborah despite his wife's defection, creeping around my bridge at 2:30 a.m. with a toolbox and a guilty expression. The footage was damning. Stephen systematically loosening support bolts, weakening joint connections, and even drilling small holes in stress-critical areas. He was methodically sabotaging the structure to create the emergency Deborah needed for her legal arguments. The irony was delicious. They were actually making the bridge dangerous to prove it was dangerous. I called Jim Patterson immediately. We've got them red-handed. Criminal conspiracy, property destruction, fraud, take your pick. Don't move anything yet, Jim advised. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Wednesday brought the smear campaign. Anonymous blog posts started appearing on neighborhood social media claiming I was an unstable veteran who'd threatened violence against HOA members. Someone had created fake accounts spreading rumors about my deteriorating mental health and financial desperation. The whisper campaign was more sophisticated than anything Deborah could have orchestrated alone. Professional character assassination suggesting I couldn't be trusted around children, questioning my military service record, even implying my wife was afraid of my unpredictable behavior. The smell of expensive public relations consultation was all over it. Thursday, the pressure campaign targeted my family directly. Linda came home from her job at First National Bank looking shaken. Marcus, something's wrong. Deborah came in today demanding to review our mortgage payments and account history. She claimed there were irregularities that needed investigation. My wife had worked at that bank for 15 years with an impeccable record. The fact that Deborah was using her business connections to intimidate Linda meant we'd pushed her past the point of rational thinking into pure vindictive territory. She also mentioned that the bank might need to reassess our loan status given the legal complications surrounding our property, Linda added quietly. That crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Going after me was one thing. Threatening my wife's livelihood was declaring total war. Friday brought the most brazen move yet. I was reviewing bridge repair estimates when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. Through my kitchen window, I watched a county demolition crew setting up equipment at the bridge approach. The crew chief was carrying official-looking paperwork and seemed genuinely confused when I approached. "Sir, we have an emergency demolition order for the unsafe structure on this property," he said, showing me documents that looked legitimate enough to fool anyone who hadn't seen the original. From what authority? County Safety Division says here the structure poses imminent collapse risk and must be removed immediately to prevent injury. The forged documents were impressively professional. Official letterhead, believable signatures, even a fake case number that would probably check out if anyone called the right phone number. Deborah had clearly invested serious money in this fabrication. "I need you to halt this operation immediately," I said calmly. "This order is fraudulent and I can prove it." While I called Jim Patterson and the real county safety office, my trail cameras captured something even more valuable. Deborah's Mercedes parked 3 blocks away, with a clear view of the demolition she'd orchestrated. She was watching her fake emergency order play out in real time. Within an hour, we had county sheriffs, real safety inspectors, and a very nervous demolition crew trying to figure out who'd hired them to destroy private property with forged government documents. The crew chief was furious when he realized he'd been set up to commit a felony. "Lady paid cash and promised all permits were handled," he told the sheriff. "Said it was emergency county work. We never would have taken the job if we'd known it was bogus." Saturday afternoon, I received the most interesting phone call of this entire ordeal. The voice was unfamiliar, but the information was pure gold. "Mr. Thornfield, this is Rebecca Martinez from the State Environmental Protection Agency. We've received reports about unauthorized development plans near protected wetlands. We'd like to schedule an inspection of your property and discuss some concerning permit applications we've been reviewing." Deborah's development dreams were about to collide with federal environmental law. The protected salamander habitat Dr. River had documented wasn't just a local curiosity. It was regulated by state and federal agencies with real enforcement power. The trap was closing around Deborah from multiple directions simultaneously. Legal fraud, criminal conspiracy, environmental violations, and enough documented evidence to keep prosecutors busy for years. Sunday evening, I sat on my bridge, watching the sunset paint Willow Creek gold and orange. The structure felt solid beneath me despite Deborah's sabotage attempts. Tomorrow's town hall meeting would be the final showdown, but I wasn't nervous anymore. Predators are most dangerous when cornered, but they're also most vulnerable when they can't see all the traps closing around them. Sunday night's emergency call from Jim Patterson shattered any illusions that Deborah was finished fighting. "Marcus, you need to get down to the bridge immediately. She's not waiting for tomorrow's town hall meeting." I grabbed my flashlight and jogged through the darkness toward Willow Creek, the smell of honeysuckle heavy in the humid air. What I found there made my blood run cold. A full demolition crew working under portable floodlights, with Deborah directing operations like a battlefield commander who'd lost her mind. "Stop right there!" I shouted over the diesel engines. "This is private property." The excavator operator looked genuinely confused when I approached his cab. "Sir, we have an emergency county order requiring immediate demolition. Lady says the structure collapsed earlier today and poses imminent danger to the creek's environmental systems." Deborah had forged another set of documents, this time claiming my bridge had partially collapsed due to structural failure, requiring immediate removal to prevent environmental contamination of protected waterways. She'd scheduled the demolition for 4 a.m. Monday morning, 2 hours before the town hall meeting where I'd planned to expose her corruption. "Ma'am," I called out to Deborah, who was standing safely beyond the work zone in a crisp business suit that looked absurdly formal for a pre-dawn demolition. "This is trespassing and destruction of private property." "Mr. Thornfield," she replied with the confidence of someone who believed she was 2 steps ahead, "emergency environmental protection supersedes private property rights. The county has authority to remove hazardous structures threatening protected waterways." Her plan was diabolically simple: destroy the evidence before I could present it. No bridge meant no historic preservation case. No physical structure meant no proof of the deliberate damage her trucks had caused. She was literally erasing the crime scene. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. My hidden steel reinforcements, installed weeks ago when I'd suspected sabotage attempts, meant her demolition wouldn't be the quick, clean operation she'd planned. The excavator's first attempt to break the main support beam resulted in a shower of sparks and a very confused operator. "What the hell? This wood's got steel inside it." "That's impossible," Deborah snapped. "It's a 100-year-old wooden bridge." The operator tried again, this time attacking a different joint. More sparks, more confusion, and the growing realization that this emergency demolition was turning into a very public spectacle. The portable floodlights were bright enough to wake half the neighborhood, and curious residents were starting to gather along the creek banks. That's when the cavalry arrived. Jim Patterson had called ahead to both the Sheriff's Department and Channel 7 News. The timing was perfect. Deborah's illegal demolition attempt was being broadcast live on local television as evidence of her desperation and criminal behavior. This is Lisa River reporting live from Willowbrook subdivision, where an apparent dispute over a historic bridge has escalated into a pre-dawn demolition attempt, the news anchor announced, her voice carrying clearly across the water. "We're witnessing what appears to be destruction of private property under questionable legal authority." The excavator operator, realizing he was being filmed attempting to destroy a steel-reinforced structure with potentially fraudulent permits, shut down his equipment and climbed out of the cab. "Lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not going to jail for destroying someone's property on live television." Deborah's composure finally cracked. You idiots. Just tear it down. I'm paying you to tear it down. Ma'am, Sheriff Deputy Rodriguez approached with official documentation. We have a warrant to examine the permits for this demolition. Additionally, we're investigating reports of forged county documents. While Deborah frantically tried to explain her way out of multiple felony charges, I pulled out my phone and played the trail camera footage from Stephen Walsh's sabotage attempt. The crowd that had gathered, including several HOA board members who'd been awakened by the commotion, watched in stunned silence as the evidence of criminal conspiracy played out in high definition. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, loud enough for the news cameras to capture, what you're witnessing is the final desperate act of a criminal conspiracy to steal private property through fraud, sabotage, and corruption. Mrs. Patterson, the retired journalist, pushed through the crowd with a thick folder of documents. I've been investigating this story for weeks, she called out. Miss Kensington Price's development company has been planning this property seizure for over 2 years, using HOA authority as cover for what amounts to legalized theft. The sheriff's deputy was taking notes while Deborah's lawyer, who'd apparently been roused from bed for this emergency, tried to distance his client from the obvious criminal activity surrounding them. My client was acting on legitimate safety concerns, the lawyer insisted weakly. Your client just attempted to destroy private property with forged government documents on live television, Deputy Rodriguez replied dryly, at 4 a.m., using steel-cutting equipment. That's not exactly the behavior of someone concerned about public safety. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, Deborah Kensington Price was being read her rights while news crews filmed the whole debacle. Her 2-year scheme to steal my family's land had just collapsed as spectacularly as she'd hoped my bridge would. The town hall meeting was still 6 hours away, but the real climax had already happened in front of television cameras and a growing crowd of neighbors who finally understood exactly what kind of person had been running their HOA. By 7 p.m., the Willowbrook Community Center was packed beyond fire code capacity. Word of Deborah's pre-dawn arrest had spread through social media like wildfire, transforming our scheduled town hall meeting into the hottest ticket in county politics. Local news crews lined the walls, county supervisors occupied the front row, and standing room was filled with neighbors who'd spent months being manipulated by a criminal conspiracy. The air was thick with anticipation and the lingering aroma of Mrs. Patterson's emergency coffee service. She'd brewed enough for an army when she realized half the county was showing up to witness Deborah's political funeral. The interim HOA President Patricia Walsh called the meeting to order, her voice shaking slightly as she addressed the overflowing crowd. Given this morning's events, we're here to address serious questions about HOA management, legal authority, and the future of our community. Deborah sat in the front row, flanked by 2 attorneys, having posted bail just hours earlier. Her perfectly coiffed appearance couldn't hide the desperate calculation in her eyes as she realized her entire world was collapsing in front of television cameras and a room full of witnesses. Before we begin, I announced, standing up from my seat in the middle section, I think everyone deserves to understand exactly what's been happening in this community for the past 2 years. I walked to the front and connected my laptop to the projection system. The first image that filled the screen was the 1919 water rights map, followed by architectural plans for luxury condominiums, bank loan documents using my property as collateral, and finally, the trail camera footage of Stephen Walsh sabotaging my bridge at 2:30 a.m. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is evidence of a criminal conspiracy to defraud this entire community, I began, my engineer's training keeping my voice steady and factual. Miss Kensington Price didn't move to Willowbrook to be a good neighbor. She moved here to execute a 2-year plan to steal waterfront property through manipulation of HOA authority. The room was dead silent, except for the hum of television cameras and someone's nervous cough echoing off the cinder block walls. County Attorney Michael Torres stepped forward with official documentation. Mr. Thornfield's family owns water rights to the entire Willow Creek system, dating back to 1919. Every property in this subdivision has been paying HOA fees for creek access and maintenance services that the HOA never had legal authority to provide. A murmur rippled through the crowd as homeowners realized the implications. 15 years of monthly fees for services based on fraudulent claims. Property values inflated by amenities that were never legally available. Deborah had been running $1 million scam disguised as suburban governance. Furthermore, Attorney Torres continued, we have evidence of forged government documents, criminal conspiracy to destroy private property, bribery of public officials, and environmental law violations that could result in federal charges. That's when Deborah finally stood up, her composure completely shattered. "This is ridiculous. I was protecting property values. That bridge is a safety hazard that threatens everyone's investments." "Miss Kensington Price," I replied calmly, "your own company's architectural plans show luxury condominiums designed specifically for my property. You've been planning this theft since before you moved here." "I was trying to improve the community. By destroying a century-old historic structure to build condos that would make you millions?" I pulled out the final piece of evidence, bank records showing pre-construction loans with my property listed as collateral. "You took out construction loans using land you didn't own as security. That's not community improvement, that's fraud." The crowd erupted in angry voices as neighbors realized how thoroughly they'd been manipulated. Patricia Walsh banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, while Deborah's attorneys whispered frantically in her ears. Environmental Protection Agency Inspector Rebecca Martinez stepped forward with her own bombshell. "Miss Kensington Price's development plans violate federal wetland protection laws. The proposed construction would destroy habitat for endangered salamanders, which carries criminal penalties under the Endangered Species Act. And," added Sheriff Deputy Rodriguez, producing an arrest warrant, "we have additional charges related to this morning's attempted destruction of private property with forged documents." The room watched in stunned silence as Deborah was handcuffed for the second time in 12 hours. Her lawyers looked like they were calculating how quickly they could withdraw from the case without ethical violations. But the most satisfying moment came when Jake Morrison stood up from the audience with a thick folder of documents. "I move that this HOA board formally apologize to the Thornfield family, drop all bridge-related actions, and cooperate fully with law enforcement investigations into the financial irregularities in our accounts." "Seconded," came voices from across the room. The vote was unanimous, except for Stephen Walsh, who was too busy consulting with his own attorney to participate. As the meeting broke up and neighbors lined up to apologize personally, I found myself shaking hands with people who'd been convinced I was the villain just days earlier. The truth has a way of clarifying things that spin and manipulation can never achieve. Outside, standing next to my saved bridge under a canopy of stars, I watched the last news trucks pack up their equipment. Justice tastes even better when it's served with a side of community healing and a future full of possibilities. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my bridge watching my grandson learn to fish from the same weathered oak railings where his great-great-grandfather first cast a line into Willow Creek. The morning mist rises from the water like it has for a century, but now it carries the sweet scent of restoration instead of the bitter smell of diesel exhaust and institutional corruption. Deborah Kensington Price is serving 18 months in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and environmental crimes. Her law license was permanently revoked. Kensington Development Company went bankrupt paying restitution, and her brother-in-law lost his building inspector job when the bribery investigation expanded. Sometimes justice moves like molasses, but when it finally arrives, it's sweeter than revenge. The immediate aftermath transformed our neighborhood in ways I never expected. The HOA was dissolved and reformed with transparent oversight and actual community focus. Instead of manufactured crises and property seizure schemes, we now organize creek cleanup days and historic preservation workshops. Patricia Walsh was elected president on a never-again platform that resonated with everyone who'd been manipulated by suburban dictatorship disguised as civic duty. My bridge became a National Register landmark 3 months after the trial ended. The ceremony was attended by the governor, state historical society officials, and a documentary crew producing a feature about grassroots resistance to HOA abuse. What started as one family protecting their heritage became a symbol of how ordinary citizens can defeat institutional corruption through persistence, documentation, and community organizing. The positive ripple effects keep expanding like circles on still water. I established the Heritage Bridge Scholarship at State University's Engineering School, funded by Deborah's fraud settlement. The first recipient was Maria Santos, whose family had faced foreclosure due to manufactured HOA violations. She's studying civil engineering with historic preservation focus, the kind of full-circle justice that restores your faith in cosmic balance. The Creek Restoration Project became a statewide model for environmental protection. Dr. Sarah Rivers' salamander research attracted federal funding for habitat preservation, and our little waterway now hosts the largest population of protected amphibians in the region. Deborah's attempt to destroy the environment for profit ended up creating one of the most successful conservation initiatives in county history. But the most meaningful change has been personal. I found new purpose as a community advocate, consulting with families facing similar HOA abuse across multiple states. The legal precedent we established, protecting property owners' rights against corrupt covenant enforcement, has been cited in dozens of cases. My mailbox overflows with thank you letters from people who used our strategies to defeat their own neighborhood tyrants. The bridge itself attracts heritage enthusiasts and engineering students studying traditional construction techniques. We host annual Bridge Day festivals featuring local artisans, environmental education, and community building. Last year's festival raised enough money to establish a preservation fund for other families fighting to save historic properties against development pressure. Linda jokes that retirement made me busier than my military career ever did, but she's proud of the expanding network we've built. Our marriage grew stronger through the crisis, and she's become the unofficial coordinator for our HOA reform advocacy. Together, we've helped establish Know Your Deed workshops teaching new homeowners how to research property rights before signing HOA agreements, knowledge that could have saved our neighbors years of manipulation. The legal reforms we pushed through state legislature strengthened homeowner protections against corrupt covenant enforcement, required environmental review for historic demolitions, and created transparency requirements for HOA financial management. Governor Martinez signed the Thornfield Bridge Law last month, calling our case proof that individual courage creates institutional change. Sarah and her husband bought a house 2 blocks away, wanting their children to grow up knowing that standing up to bullies, even ones with law degrees and corporate backing, is always worth the fight. Yesterday, I taught my 4-year-old granddaughter to skip stones from the same bridge where her ancestors courted, celebrated, and built foundations for everything our family represents. The smell of my wife's roses mingles with creek water, and the distant sound of children playing in what's become the safest, most connected neighborhood in the county. But speaking of neighborhood drama, you should hear what happened when Mrs. Patterson discovered the city contractors were trying to condemn her prize-winning garden for a necessary parking expansion. Let's just say some people never learned that this community doesn't roll over for corruption anymore. If you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And some of these battles need to be fought where everyone can see the truth. And smash that subscribe button for HOA stories because we're just getting started exposing the corruption happening in neighborhoods just like yours. Sometimes the best way forward really is remembering where you came from and protecting it for the people who'll come after you.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.